Yes, I know I'm way behind on my backlog, but for obvious reasons, we're moving this up in the order. Shelley Duvall passed away on July 11th, 2024. Duvall was a titan of the 1970s and 80s film scene, best known for her performances in Annie Hall and The Shining. But amongst the appraisal of her performances in those films, another part of her legacy has been given a lot of attention in the wake of her passing: Faerie Tale Theatre.
Once upon a fairy tale theater, Shelley Duvall, its lovely creator, made a magical, mystical world full of stars, with Broderick and Beals and Nimoy and Gar. They now tell stories of fable and lore, of puppets and princes and fairies by the score. Alan and Art make clothes out of sight, and you'll even see Robin in green froggy tights. There's warlocks and ghosts and visions all scary. Vanessa and Mary are both quite contrary. James Earl Jones will give out 3 wishes. The fun is abundant and so are the kisses. Fairy Tale Theatre, the best ever shown. Wednesdays at 6, 5 Central Time Zone.
Initially broadcast from 1982 to 1987 on Showtime, before repeats in local syndication and on the Disney Channel, Faerie Tale Theatre is actually a very simple program, but one with surprisingly strong execution. And a good example, in my opinion, is the show's 3rd episode, which adapts Rapunzel. Once upon a time, there were 2 poor parents. The wife is with child, and unfortunately an evil witch curses her with a craving for radishes. Radishes, of course, were the prized crop at the witch's lair, which the husband is inevitably caught stealing. The witch desperately wants a child, and after catching the father in the act, calls dibs on the unborn Rapunzel. While the couple tries to hide, the witch does come to collect, eventually being able to kidnap the poor child. Years later, the child has grown into a young woman, and she is being held captive in a tower and has incredibly long blonde hair. The witch forbids her to leave the tower, socialize with men, which she labels as evil, or even cut her hair. But Rapunzel's forlorn song reverberates throughout the forest and catches the attention of a dashing young prince. Rapunzel uses her considerable locks as a rope ladder, and the prince is able to climb her hair in order to visit her. But the witch grows suspicious, and shortly after Rapunzel and the prince make plans to escape, Rapunzel's nosy parrot blows everything. The witch cuts her hair, teleports her to the desert, and lies in wait for the prince, springing an attack that is shockingly vicious for a children's show.
I've got you. At last.
Rapunzel, what have you done with her?
Nothing. Compared to what I'm going to do to you.
Can't see.
You'll never see Rapunzel again.
Now blinded, the prince searches the globe for Rapunzel, ultimately winding up in the desert that the witch cast her to. Rapunzel, now having given birth to their 2 children, reunites with him, and her magic tears fall into the prince's eyes, curing his blindness. They move to a castle and live happily ever after. Yeah, except for the witch, who dies off screen. Brutal. Pretty simple stuff, but this is a case where the little summary thing I do in Pick of the Week videos isn't really the whole picture. Faerie Tale Theatre is an uncommon children's show, unique both for the 1980s as well as unique today. So let's start off the bat. This is a very cheap looking show. Now, I don't think this is inherently a bad thing. For one, the effects cross over from bad to somehow charming, and they place the show firmly in the realm of camp. This series also has a surprisingly strong sense of humor. It's not Shrek. It's not really trying to subvert anything, but it has fun with its subject matter. The best analog I can give for this show's budget is classic Doctor Who. And like classic Doctor Who, the show works most when you consider that it's basically a stage play. You're not here for the lavish effects. In Faerie Tale Theatre's case, you're here to see the show's cast act their butts off. So let's get to that. Faerie Tale Theatre's selling point, its claim to fame, was its rotating cast of names in every episode. Each story would feature a different selection of celebrity guests. And I'm not talking the type of lower tier B players that you would see on, say, the $100,000 pyramid. No, I'm talking Hollywood A-listers. I'm talking Liza Minnelli, Billy Crystal, and Robin Williams. Faerie Tale Theatre took these legitimately big Hollywood names and put them in a completely different, stripped-down context that you wouldn't be familiar with them in. Christopher Reeve would be the example I'd use. He's, of course, best known for making us believe a man can fly in the Superman films. But here, he's on Faerie Tale Theatre's Spartan sets as Prince Charming to Bernadette Peters' Sleeping Beauty. And he does a pretty good job. Rapunzel's cast is stripped down compared to a lot of the other episodes of Faerie Tale Theatre. There's really only 3 actors in this episode, with 2 of them playing dual roles. Shelley Duvall is, of course, the headliner. Now, Duvall was one of the key creative forces behind Faerie Tale Theatre. Not only is she the show's creator and executive producer, she introduces each installment in her trademark sing-song voice. This has become a particularly cozy internet meme.
Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall. Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall. Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall. Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall. Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall.
But this is one of 3 episodes where she is actually included in the episode itself, playing both Rapunzel and Rapunzel's mother. Duvall was one of the most charismatic actresses in Hollywood, deftly able to embody the terrified wife of a crazed killer, and probably the most accurate depiction of olive oil humanly possible in live action. Now, Duvall is a straight woman here. Her charm does effortlessly come through in her performances. Her Rapunzel exudes a sweet innocence that is quite charming, but she decides to tone it back a few notches, widely ceding the spotlight to her 2 co-stars. The male lead, playing both the prince and Rapunzel's father, is Jeff Bridges. Bridges gets to explore 2 distinct roles here. As Rapunzel's father, he's mumbling and oafish. As the prince, he embodies a certain kind of plucky charm. Both roles, of course, hint at the range he would soon be known for. When this episode originally aired, Bridges was just coming off of Tron, the beloved cult classic, and was over a year out from his Oscar-nominated turn in John Carpenter's Starman. These days, he's best known for his legendary performance as the Dude in the Coen brothers' masterpiece, The Big Lebowski, and as Obadiah Stane in Iron Man, the first Marvel Cinematic Universe villain, and still one of the best.
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
The witch is wonderfully played by Gena Rowlands, who is easily the standout performer of this episode, giving her all to the proceedings like this is Shakespeare. Her witch is evil, yes, but it's an evil that comes from a place of deep pain. When she learns of Rapunzel's plans to escape captivity, she lets out this chilling wail, and I almost felt sorry for her.
What's this? I think I love you. Rapunzel, will you marry me?
Rowlands got her start in repertory theater before moving to television, appearing in The Western Laramie and a couple other shows, like Peyton Place. She moved into film acting with 1958's The High Cost of Loving, before ultimately making 10 films with her husband John Cassavetes. She earned Oscar nominations for 2 of them, A Woman Under the Influence and Gloria. Rowlands moved back into television in the 1980s, mostly in TV movies, and ultimately won 3 Emmys. She acted well into the 21st century, most notably in her son Nick's film The Notebook, and didn't consider herself formally retired until 2015. Fairy tales, of course, have to have a narrator, and Faerie Tale Theatre is no exception. Most of the episodes were narrated by different celebrity guests, and Rapunzel is narrated by none other than one Roddy McDowall, who is no stranger to fading into the background, as he's still probably most well known for the original Planet of the Apes movies. McDowall's credits are too notable to really list here, but I'll single out the 2 that I believe my audience probably would be most interested in. The original voice of Niddler in the original broadcast of Dark Water, and of course the Mad Hatter in Batman the Animated Series. This star power didn't just extend to the actors in front of the camera. Faerie Tale Theatre often used notable directorial talent. The show's take on Aladdin was directed by a then unknown Tim Burton, while the adaptation of Rip Van Winkle was held by, of all people, Francis Ford Coppola. Not gonna lie, getting the guy who directed The Godfather to direct your low-budget children's show is kind of an insane flex. Rapunzel was directed by Gilbert Cates. Cates was a director of both stage and screen, which made him perfect for this show. He produced a number of short-lived Broadway plays, the most notable being I Never Sang for My Father, which he directed the film adaptation of in 1970. Cates would go on to direct films such as Summer Wishes, Winter Dreams, and Oh God, Book 2. He's probably most notable for producing 14 different Oscar telecasts, and he's widely credited for bringing in Billy Crystal as the host. Cates would also dabble in kids' TV, producing the Berenstain Bears Christmas Tree with his brother Joe Cates. And while we're on the subject of his family, I feel like I am legally obligated to mention his niece, Phoebe Cates. Shelley Duvall got the idea for Faerie Tale Theatre while filming Popeye with Robin Williams. Duvall came across the fairy tale The Frog Prince, brought the story to Robin's attention, Robin liked the idea, and he ended up starring as the amphibian royalty in what would become the first episode of Faerie Tale Theatre. Now, this show wasn't as new of an idea as you would think. In 1958, former child star Shirley Temple would helm Shirley Temple's Storybook, a show that, like Faerie Tale Theatre, featured known actors reenacting notable fairy tales. Unlike Faerie Tale Theatre, the wattage was quite a bit lower, despite the fact that it aired on network television, a luxury that Faerie Tale Theatre didn't have. The series was initially broadcast on Showtime, forever the Pepsi to HBO's Coke. But despite its second-place status, Showtime was actually more ambitious and prolific when it came to original series than HBO was in the 1980s. Now, of course, HBO is well known now for its slate of extremely high-quality prestige originals. But back in the 80s, their original shows were very much on the lower end of the spectrum. HBO's typical fare consisted of trashy morality plays like The Hitchhiker, and raunchy comedies like the O.J. Simpson football farce First and 10. They didn't really aim for quality as much as they aimed for what the executives called cable edge, code for nudity and gore. Now that's in stark contrast to Showtime's surprisingly varied output. There's John Byner's aptly named sketch comedy Bizarre. There's Brothers, an early example of queer representation, even if it does err on the side of stereotype. The Paper Chase, a revival of a critically acclaimed yet short-lived CBS drama. Super Dave, a variety show headlined by the world's worst stuntman, and It's Gary Shandling Show, a sitcom that didn't break the fourth wall so much as it doused it with gasoline and set it on fire. Those last two were probably the network's most notable productions of the 80s, with Shandling's show in particular getting lavished with praise. In fact, HBO's reputation as a home for quality original programming arguably didn't get truly established until Shandling moved over there to do The Larry Sanders Show. But both networks had extensive programming for kids and families. This may surprise some of you, but in the 80s and 90s, cable kids TV wasn't just limited to Nickelodeon or Disney Channel. Many networks set aside chunks of time to air cartoons or other kids' programming. Most of these were older repeats, well-worn shows like Flintstones or Looney Tunes. But a few networks did invest in original shows for children, and HBO and Showtime were foremost among them. HBO's offerings were some of the best children's shows you could watch during the 1980s. Not surprising, given that one of its flagship shows in general was Fraggle Rock. Jim Henson don't miss. But a lot of its output was co-productions. HBO was one of 3 broadcasters funding Fraggle Rock, alongside Henson. That meant the risk was spread around, and more money was available for the production. Showtime's kids and family programming, named Family Time for much of the 80s and 90s, mostly consisted of feature films, foreign imports, and a little bit of original programming. Faerie Tale Theatre was the arguable flagship of this block.
All eyes turn for Showtime for family entertainment. And in February, your family will enjoy the further adventures of America's own Swiss Family Robinson. Then join Huck Finn as he drifts down the Mississippi and into adventure on the Mark Twain Theater. Valentine's Day may be kaput unless the Cupids can save it with their love laser in the Valentine's Day that almost wasn't. A dashing prince grants release to the ravishing Rapunzel on Faerie Tale Theatre. And Benji brings us an exclusive behind-the-scenes look in Benji at Work, features for the whole family in February.
New episodes aired pretty sporadically, roughly 6 or 7 episodes a year, and 27 were ultimately produced. So, is Faerie Tale Theatre good? Yes, but for modern viewers, I do have to put some asterisks next to it. You have to remember that Faerie Tale Theatre is a product of its time. A low-budget show produced before affordable special effects were widespread, before filmmaking fully absorbed the visual language of music videos. It was also made in the pre-Shrek era, when subversive, fractured fairy tales were more of the exception than the rule. Disney didn't make a Rapunzel animated movie until 2010's Tangled, and that is very much a modernized, offbeat take on the story. If Disney made a version in the 70s or 80s, I would imagine it probably would have looked a lot like what we see here on Faerie Tale Theatre. Now, that doesn't mean the show's bad. Far from it. It's just that the way that studios make fairy tale adaptations and the way they adapt these characters are just way different in 2024 than they would have been in 1983. And one does have to consider the context of the time. Children's television during the 1980s was dominated by action figures punching other action figures, shows that were glorified toy advertising. In contrast, Faerie Tale Theatre is this charming, gentle, low-budget show. And it's also admirable for taking these big-name stars and giving them a platform that introduced them to a younger audience. I'll just say this. I hope to be doing Pick of the Weeks for a long time, but I'm pretty sure that this is the only time that I'm going to mention Academy Award-winning actors in these videos. That's because that's rare for children's TV, then and now. The goal is almost always to create stars, to pick a Selena Gomez or a Hilary Duff and nurture them into becoming top talents. But you never see established stars coming in and doing kids' TV. And I think that's a shame. I'd love to see a modern version of Faerie Tale Theatre with Robert Downey Jr., Hugh Jackman, or Tom Holland. So it's not surprising that this show made an impression. When Shelley passed, a lot of the obituaries made sure to mention Faerie Tale Theatre. There was almost nothing like it at the time, and I would be shocked if there was anything like it ever again. Duvall made a number of similar series to Faerie Tale Theatre. There was Tall Tales and Legends, basically Faerie Tale Theatre for American folklore, which ran for 9 episodes from 1985 to 1987. There was Nightmare Classics, adaptations of classic horror literature like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde intended for a slightly older audience, which ran briefly during 1989. And there was Mother Goose Rockin' Rhyme, an original feature for the Disney Channel where Duvall met her future partner, Dan Gilroy. In the 1990s, Duvall effectively retired from Hollywood, relocating with Gilroy to her hometown of Texas. The reasons why were never fully articulated, but often attributed to 2 things. Duvall's Hollywood residence suffering damage during the 1994 Northridge earthquake, and her brother being diagnosed with cancer. These are valid reasons to leave the profession. But unfortunately, Duvall's withdrawal from public life made her a staple of gossip and those horrible "you won't believe what she looks like now" clickbait links that you see on every major site these days. That reached its nadir with a ghoulish Dr. Phil quote-unquote interview that exploited Duvall's mental state. Now, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not qualified to say what she did or didn't suffer from. That's not my place. I do know 100% that she didn't deserve to be paraded around like some freak show. And a lot of other people believe that too, because the story of Duvall's last years was filled with a lot more love than trashy tabloid talk television would have you expect. One of the more surprising names would be Lee Unkrich, director of the best Toy Story movie, Toy Story 3. Unkrich is a massive fan of Kubrick's The Shining, and he was able to make contact with her in 2021. As did Ryan Overmeyer, a die-hard fan of Faerie Tale Theatre, who was able to throw Duvall a 70th birthday party with other fellow fans. And of course, the Shelley Duvall Archives Twitter account. Sarah, the maintainer, was in close contact with Shelley during the last years of her life, and has really led the remembrances on social media. When Hollywood stopped calling for roles, when she was made into a laughingstock on national television, Shelley Duvall's fans stepped in. They made sure her final years were filled with love and hope. They showered her with the love and affection that she deserved. They let her know that she was loved and cherished. Shelley Duvall's last years weren't the story of a recluse who was hiding in shame from Hollywood, but someone who got to experience the love of all the people that she touched with her art. And that's beautiful.